Good evening, everybody. Today we are pleased to have invited Maggie Schwartz from Harvard University to tell us her feeling of studying together with her mom. Well, Maggie.
Thanks. I am very happy to meet you all.
Maggie, are you and your mom studying the same major at the university?
Not really. She is studying in law school and I am studying journalism. So you see, she is a graduate student while I am an undergraduate. Since we started at the same time and hers is a 4-year night program, our school schedules are synced.
Which means?
We follow the same schedule of study. We take our exams during the same busy weeks and experience similar relief at the end of December and May. Last spring, we compared notes on our cover letters and interviews for our job applications. Last June, as we were both preparing for our summer internships, my mother and I traded fashion advice. Presently, we will probably graduate within days of each other.
Interesting. Then you must have a lot in common at study.
You bet. As students, we've shared study habits. Take notes by hand, general truths. You can't avoid having a few bad professors, and encouraging platitudes like, "It's okay. No one will care how you did on your science of cooking or constitutional law midterm." Where she's listened to my complaints about freshman year roommates and dining hall food, I've helped her buy textbooks online and wished her luck in moot court practice. Occasionally, we've even studied together. When Mom came to visit during Freshman Parents' Weekend, I took her into the library on the pretext that she was on a library tour. We sat side by side in the big open room on the first floor, she diligently taking notes on a huge red volume that she had lugged from New York City on the train, I casually reading about Greek myths.
What do you think is the biggest advantage of having a parent studying together with you?
I know that my mother has felt the frustration of a paper that won't write and the excitement of mastering a difficult topic. I don't need to explain my elaborate theory that I am a bad test taker. She said the same thing about herself. And talking with her is a good way to get perspective on those occasional hurdles that crop up in college. Although we are both taking a substantial course load, Mom is also working a full-time job in the financial industry. That urges me to study harder. So I should say encouragement.
Any disadvantages then?
Well, sometimes I wonder whether we are getting a little too involved in each other's scholastic lives. This usually occurs to me about twice a year, when my mother calls to inform me of her grades. Once, she reached me in the middle of a date. "I got my first A! Aren't you going to congratulate me?" And often, when the news has been disappointing, I haven't known how to respond. Last fall, I was chastised for passing along a speculative tidbit I had heard in the dining hall, that, because of grade inflation, GPAs once considered good might be viewed with new scrutiny. Jane has informed me that B is the new F. Mom announced at Thanksgiving. I didn't know what to say to comfort her.
I see. Is the phenomenon of parent and kid studying together at university a rare case?
I am afraid not. Changing careers later in life is no longer a rarity, so it is not uncommon for students and their parents to be toying with the big decisions at the same time. Class surveys indicate that the majority of Harvard alumni have shifted directions when it comes to their careers. With the financial collapse of 2008, such shifts have become more widespread. Students have seen their family members lose jobs or change them. Gone is the time when you start out at a company and work there for the rest of your life.
So, your mom started study again, just because she wanted to change her career?
Yes. She used to be in the real estate industry, but now she wants to be a lawyer.
Does her experience affect you somewhat?
Certainly. Freshman week, in one of the welcoming speeches, our dean mentioned that many of us might have grown up thinking that doctor, lawyer, teacher were our only options. She urged us to stick to our dreams. But later I realized talking about passions is one thing, Actually following them is another. By the time I started to think about what professional directions I might want to take, I had heard the average American changes careers 7 times, so often that it was hard not to become numb to its message. The last thing that the enthusiastic Harvard student wants to do is to imagine moving from job to job until she lands somewhere by chance, especially when the economy is so uncertain. My mom can serve as a good example. Even if she graduated from Harvard herself as a brilliant student, she had to make alterations of her career.
So, is your mom actually happy studying with younger students?
Hard to say. Frustration is routine for older students, who have to learn how to study all over again. Mom once described the experience of taking classes with students half her age after 30 years in the workforce. What's most challenging is that you come into class knowing how to make a cake, but you're all there to make omelet.
A kind of wasting time.
Exactly.
Do you think your mom has played an important role in shaping your idea of what kind of person you want to be?
Absolutely. Harvard offers many resources for students who want to figure out where their future lies. Advisors, tutors, and OCS keep their doors open to help undergraduates embark on this kind of discovery. One can't find one's passions in a booklet on summer internships or a list of possible career paths. It's a gradual process that involves sharing thoughts and then coming back to them. A discussion that doesn't always have its end goal in mind. In the course of my time at Harvard, it has been just such a give and take with professors, with friends, and with my mother that has slowly shaped my ideas of who I might want to be. I really cherish the time she spent together with me at university.
Well, Maggie, thank you very much for staying with us today.
My pleasure.
Models for arguments. Good morning, everyone. My name is David, and I am good at arguing. So, welcome to our introductory lecture on argumentation. Why do we want to argue? Why do we try to convince other people to believe things that they don't want to believe? And is that even a nice thing to do? Is that a nice way to treat other human beings? Try and make them think something they don't want to think? Well, my answer is going to make reference to 3 models for arguments. The first model, let's call this the dialectical model, is that we think of arguments as war. And you know what that's like. There's a lot of screaming and shouting and winning and losing. And that's not really a very helpful model for arguing, but it's a pretty common and fixed one. I guess you must have seen that type of arguing many times, in the street, on the bus, or in the subway. Let's move on to the second model. The second model for arguing regards arguments as proofs. Think of a mathematician's argument. Here's my argument. Does it work? Is it any good? Are the premises warranted? Are the inferences valid? Does the conclusion follow the premises? No opposition, no adversariality, not necessarily any arguing in the adversarial sense. And there's a third model to keep in mind that I think is going to be very helpful, and that is arguments as performances, arguments as being in front of an audience. We can think of a politician trying to present a position, trying to convince the audience of something. But there's another twist on this model that I really think is important, namely that when we argue before an audience, sometimes the audience has a more participatory role in the argument. That is, you present your arguments in front of an audience who are like juries that make a judgment and decide the case. Let's call this model the rhetorical model, where you have to tailor your argument to the audience at hand. Of those 3, the argument as war is the dominant one. It dominates how we talk about arguments. It dominates how we think about arguments. And because of that, it shapes how we argue, our actual conduct in arguments. We want strong arguments, arguments that have a lot of punch, arguments that are right on target. We want to have our defenses up, and our strategies all in order. We want killer arguments. That's the kind of argument we want. It is the dominant way of thinking about arguments. When I'm talking about arguments, that's probably what you thought of, the adversarial model. But the war metaphor, the war paradigm, or model for thinking about arguments has, I think, negative effects on how we argue. First, it elevates tactics over substance. You can take a class in logic argumentation. You learn all about the strategies that people use to try and win arguments. And it makes arguing adversarial. It's polarizing. And the only foreseeable outcomes are triumph, glorious triumph, or disgraceful defeat. I think those are very destructive effects, and, worst of all, it seems to prevent things like negotiation and collaboration. I think the argument as a war metaphor inhibits those other kinds of resolutions to argumentation. And finally, this is really the worst thing. Arguments don't seem to get us anywhere. They're dead ends. We don't get anywhere. Oh, and one more thing. That is, if argument is war, then there's also an implicit aspect of meaning, learning with losing. And let me explain what I mean. Suppose you and I have an argument. You believe a proposition, and I don't. And I say, well, why do you believe that? And you give me your reasons. And I object and say, well, what about? And you answer my objection. And I have a question. Well, what do you mean? How does it apply over here? And you answer my question. Now, suppose at the end of the day, I've objected, I've questioned, I've raised all sorts of questions from an opposite perspective, and in every case, you've responded to my satisfaction. And so, at the end of the day, I say, you know what? I guess you're right. Maybe finally I lost my argument, but isn't it also a process of learning? So, you see, arguments may also have positive effects. So how can we find new ways to achieve those positive effects? We need to think of new kinds of arguments. Here, I have some suggestions. If we want to think of new kinds of arguments, what we need to do is think of new kinds of arguers, people who argue. So, try this. Think of all the roles that people play in arguments. There's the proponent and the opponent in an adversarial, dialectical argument. There's the audience in rhetorical arguments. There's the reasoner in arguments as proofs. All these different roles. Now, can you imagine an argument in which you are the arguer, but you're also in the audience watching yourself argue? Can you imagine yourself watching yourself argue? That means you need to be supported by yourself. Even when you lose the argument, still, at the end of the argument, you could say, wow, that was a good argument. Can you do that? I think you can. In this way, you've been supported by yourself. Up till now, I have lost a lot of arguments. It really takes practice to become a good arguer in the sense of being able to benefit from losing. But fortunately, I've had many colleagues who have been willing to step up and provide that practice for me. Okay, to sum up, in today's lecture, I have introduced 3 models of arguments. The first model is called the Dialectical Model. The second one is the model of arguments as proofs. And the last one is called the Rhetorical Model, the model of arguments as performances. I have also emphasized that, though the adversarial type of arguments is quite common, we can still make arguments produce some positive effects. Next time, I will continue our discussion on the process of arguing.